Maya Richardson stood in the long line at JFK Airport, her shoulders slightly slumped from exhaustion. The week had been a whirlwind of meetings across the country, and all she wanted now was to sink into her first-class seat on the flight home, maybe enjoy a glass of wine and close her eyes. She wore simple jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and comfortable sneakers, a far cry from the power suits she typically wore in boardrooms. People rushed past her, dragging suitcases and shouting, "Interphones." A baby cried somewhere behind her. Maya checked her watch and sighed. Still 20 minutes before she'd reach the counter at this rate. She could have used the VIP check-in, of course. As the owner of Horizon Airlines, she had access to every perk and privilege. But that wasn't why she was traveling like this today. 6 months ago, Maya had received troubling customer feedback reports. Complaints about unequal treatment, about certain passengers being treated with less respect than others. The reports showed patterns she couldn't ignore, patterns that matched experiences she'd had herself before her success. So she'd made a decision. Once every quarter, she would travel as just another passenger. No special treatment, no announcement of her arrival. She wanted to see the real Horizon Airlines experience. When she finally reached the counter, the attendant barely looked up from his computer. "Destination?" he asked, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Chicago," Maya replied with a smile. The man nodded and held out his hand. "Ticket and ID." Maya handed over her documents. The attendant glanced at her ID, then at her face, then back at the computer. His eyebrows rose slightly as he noticed the first-class ticket. "This is first class," he said, as if Maya might not be aware. "Yes?" she said simply. The man looked at her casual clothes again, his eyes lingering a bit too long on her worn sneakers. "There must be some mistake. Let me check the system again." Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest but kept her expression neutral. "There's no mistake, I booked first class." The attendant's fingers clacked on the keyboard. "It's showing you were upgraded. These are usually reserved for our frequent flyers or business travelers." The implication hung in the air between them. "I wasn't upgraded," Maya said calmly. "I purchased a first-class ticket directly." People in line behind her were starting to shift impatiently. The attendant sighed and printed her boarding pass, sliding it across the counter with noticeably less courtesy than he had shown to the businessman before her. "Gate 42B. Boarding starts in 45 minutes. Maya took the boarding pass and moved away, making mental notes. The interaction hadn't been outright rude, but there had been assumptions made, subtle ones that many people might not even notice. She stopped for coffee and a sandwich at one of the airport cafes, then made her way to the gate. The boarding area was already crowded when she arrived. She found an empty seat and pulled out her phone, checking emails while occasionally observing the gate staff. The gate attendant, a woman with perfectly styled hair and a crisp uniform, began the pre-boarding announcements. Maya watched as she smiled warmly at an elderly couple, helping them find their boarding passes. That was the kind of service Maya wanted for all Horizon passengers. When it was time for first-class boarding, Maya gathered her small carry-on and approached the gate. The attendant's smile faltered slightly as she approached. "Boarding pass, please," she said, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been moments before. Maya handed over her pass. The attendant scanned it and a small frown appeared on her face. "Ma'am, I think there's been some confusion. This is the first-class boarding call." "Yes, I know," Maya said. "I have a first-class ticket." The attendant looked at the boarding pass again, then at Maya, taking in her casual attire and natural hair that she hadn't bothered to straighten after her morning shower. "Just one moment, please." The attendant turned to her colleague, a younger man who had been checking in other passengers. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing at Maya several times. Other passengers were lining up behind Maya now. She could feel their stares, their impatience. The familiar feeling of being seen as an obstacle, a problem to be dealt with rather than a person to be served, washed over her. The attendant returned with her colleague. "Ma'am, it appears there's been an issue with your booking. We show this seat has actually been reserved for another passenger." She held the boarding pass in her perfectly manicured hands, That's not possible, Maya said, keeping her voice even despite the rising frustration. I booked this ticket myself 3 weeks ago. I understand you believe that, the attendant said, in a tone that suggested she believed nothing of the sort. But our system is showing a different reservation for this seat. Perhaps you were looking at a different flight when you booked? Maya took a deep breath. No, I wasn't. This is my flight, and that is my seat. I'd like to speak to a supervisor, please. A few people in line made audible sighs of annoyance. The attendant's smile became tight and artificial. Of course, but I should warn you that holding up the boarding process won't change the computer system. We're quite full today, but I can try to find you a seat in economy. Before Maya could respond, the attendant did something that made Maya's calm exterior finally crack. She tore Maya's boarding pass, not completely in half, but enough to invalidate it, while reaching for a new blank one to issue an economy seat. What are you doing? Maya asked, her voice rising slightly. You can't just tear my ticket and downgrade me without my consent. Ma'am, please lower your voice, the attendant said sharply. You're delaying other passengers. A few people were watching now, some with sympathy in their eyes, others clearly annoyed at the holdup. The man behind Maya in line, dressed in an expensive suit, cleared his throat loudly. I need to speak to a supervisor immediately, Maya said firmly, and I need you to stop making assumptions about my booking. The gate attendant's colleague picked up a phone, presumably to call for a supervisor. The attendant herself crossed, her arms, boarding pass still torn in her hand. As I explained, there's been a system error. These things happen. I'm trying to find you an alternative seat so you can make this flight. Maya felt her phone buzz in her pocket. It would be her assistant, wondering why she hadn't boarded yet, maybe even tracking her through the airline system. She had told her team not to intervene no matter what today, and she meant to keep to that plan. I don't want an alternative seat, Maya said quietly. I want the first-class seat I paid for. A tall woman in a supervisory uniform approached briskly. What seems to be the problem here? The attendant turned to her supervisor. This passenger insists she has a first-class ticket, but the system is showing the seat is already assigned to another passenger. The supervisor turned to Maya with the practiced patience of someone used to dealing with difficult customers. Ma'am, I understand you're frustrated, but sometimes bookings get mixed up. If you'd like to step aside, we can try to sort this out while other passengers board. The booking isn't mixed up, Maya said, feeling her professional mask beginning to slip. This was exactly the kind of experience she'd been hearing about in the complaints. And I'd prefer to resolve this now before anyone else is assigned my seat. The supervisor took the torn boarding pass from the attendant and examined it. Our records show this seat was reserved for a priority passenger. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding when you booked. Maya took another deep breath and decided it was time. She reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet, extracting not just her ID but her executive access card, a special card that identified her as the majority owner of Horizon Airlines. There's been no misunderstanding, she said, handing both cards to the supervisor. That seat is mine, and I'd like to understand why your staff assumed otherwise. The supervisor stared at the ID card and executive access badge in her hands. Her eyes widened and she quickly looked up at Maya's face, then back down at the cards. The color drained from her cheeks. Ms. Richardson, she stammered. We didn't realize. The gate attendant, confused by her supervisor's sudden change in demeanor, peered over at the cards. When she saw the executive badge with Maya's name and title, she froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. You tore my boarding pass, Maya said quietly, not wanting to cause a scene but unwilling to let the moment pass without acknowledgement. By now, several passengers were watching the interaction with interest. An older man near the front of the line whispered something to his wife, who squinted at Maya and then nodded in recognition. I sincerely apologize, Ms. Richardson, the supervisor said, her professional composure returning despite the obvious shock. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Of course, your seat is available. I'll personally escort you onto the aircraft immediately. The gate attendant remained frozen, still holding the torn pieces of the boarding pass like they might explode in her hands. I'd prefer to board with the other first-class passengers, Maya said, and I'll need a new boarding pass, please. Of course, of course. The supervisor nodded vigorously, taking the torn pieces from the attendant and moving quickly to the desk. The attendant finally found her voice. Ms. Richardson, I had no idea. The system didn't flag. She stopped abruptly, realizing that explaining wouldn't help and might make things worse. Maya looked at her directly. Would it have mattered if I wasn't the owner? Shouldn't all passengers with valid tickets be treated with the same respect? The attendant swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. You're absolutely right. The supervisor returned with a new boarding pass, carefully handing it to Maya along with her ID and executive badge. Everything is sorted, Ms. Richardson. We verified your original booking. I don't know why the system showed a conflict. Maya knew why. Nothing had been wrong with the system. The attendants had simply made assumptions based on how she looked. A black woman in casual clothes couldn't possibly belong in first class unless there was some mistake. It was an old, familiar story. Thank you, Maya said, taking the boarding pass. She noticed that the other passengers in line were watching with interest. Some looked embarrassed, perhaps recognizing what had happened. Others just seemed curious about the sudden change in the staff's attitude. Just as Maya was about to step through the gate, she paused and turned back to the supervisor. I'd like to speak with both of you after the flight. Not to punish anyone, she added, seeing the fear flash across the attendant's face. But because I think we have an opportunity here. The supervisor nodded quickly. Of course, Ms. Richardson. We'll make ourselves available whenever is convenient for you. Maya boarded the plane and found her seat in first class. As she settled in, she couldn't help noticing how the flight attendants now hovered anxiously, offering her champagne, extra pillows, magazines, anything they could think of. Word had traveled fast. A flight attendant leaned down with a glass of champagne. Ms. Richardson, we're honored to have you on board today. If there's anything at all you need during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask. Maya accepted the champagne with a small smile. Thank you. I'd just like to be treated the same as any other first-class passenger. The flight attendant nodded, but Maya could see she didn't fully understand. This special treatment wasn't what Maya wanted either. She hadn't revealed her identity to get better service for herself. She had done it to highlight a problem. As the other passengers boarded, Maya noticed several giving her curious glances. A businessman taking the seat across the aisle did a double-take when he saw her, clearly recognizing her face from business, magazines or television appearances. You're Maya Richardson, he said, not quite a question. Maya nodded politely. I read about your acquisition of Horizon last year. He continued, settling into his seat. Bold move. The industry didn't see it coming. Sometimes the best moves are the ones nobody expects, Maya replied. The man seemed to want to continue the conversation, but Maya opened her laptop, signaling that she had work to do. In truth, she wanted time to think. What had happened at the gate wasn't unusual. Maya had experienced similar treatment throughout her life, even as her bank account grew. Money could buy a lot of things. A first-class ticket, a nice house, designer clothes when she wanted them. But it couldn't always buy equal treatment, not right away, not without seeing the proof first. The flight took off smoothly. Maya declined dinner, having eaten at the airport, and spent the first hour reviewing emails and making notes about the incident. This wasn't just about her personal experience. The customer feedback reports had shown a pattern, one that affected Horizon's reputation and, more importantly, hurt people. Toward the end of the flight, Maya closed her laptop and leaned back in her seat. The confrontation at the gate replayed in her mind. The attendant's skepticism, the torn boarding pass, the supervisor's assumption that Maya must be confused about her own booking. None of it was outright hostility, just 1,000 small cuts of disbelief and doubt. When the plane landed in Chicago, Maya waited until most passengers had disembarked before gathering her things. The flight attendant who had served her appeared nervous as she passed. Have a wonderful day, Ms. Richardson. It was an honor having you on board. Maya paused. Can I ask you something? The flight attendant straightened her posture. Of course. If I hadn't been Maya Richardson, owner of the airline, But just another black woman in casual clothes with a first-class ticket. Would your colleagues at the gate have torn up my boarding pass? The question hung in the air between them. The flight attendant didn't immediately answer, which was in itself an answer. I'd like to think not, she finally said. But I can't honestly say for sure. Maya nodded, appreciating the candor. Thank you for your honesty. She made her way through the jet bridge and into the terminal, where she spotted the gate supervisor and attendant from JFK waiting awkwardly near the exit. They had clearly been informed of her arrival and instructed to be there. The supervisor stepped forward, hands clasped in front of her. Ms. Richardson, we can't apologize enough for the misunderstanding earlier. Maya stopped and looked at them both. Several arriving passengers slowed down, perhaps sensing something interesting was happening. Let's not call it a misunderstanding, Maya said gently. That suggests no one was at fault. What happened was an assumption based on how I looked, not on my ticket or reservation. The gate attendant's eyes dropped to the floor. The supervisor nodded reluctantly. You're right, the supervisor admitted. And I'm deeply sorry. I don't want apologies, Maya said. I want change. This isn't just about me. Our customer feedback shows this happens to other passengers too. A small crowd of airport staff had gathered nearby, whispering among themselves as they realized the owner of Horizon Airlines was having an impromptu meeting at the gate. I'd like both of you to join. Me, Maya continued. Not for disciplinary action, but for a discussion. I'm forming a task force on customer experience, and I think your perspectives would be valuable. The gate attendant looked up in surprise. You want us to join a task force? After what happened? Especially after what happened, Maya said. Who? Better to help address the problem than people who've seen it firsthand? Sometimes the best insights come from mistakes, if we're willing to learn from them. The supervisor looked relieved but confused. That's very generous, Ms. Richardson. Most executives would have fired us on the spot. Firing you doesn't solve the problem, Maya replied. It just hides it. The problem is bigger than any individual. It's about systems and cultures and unconscious assumptions, and addressing that takes all of us working together. As Maya finished speaking, she noticed her assistant waiting discreetly near the baggage claim area. The real work would begin tomorrow. Meetings, policy reviews, training programs. But for now, she had planted a seed. The gate attendant squared her shoulders and looked Maya in the eye for the first time since the incident. Thank you for the opportunity, Ms. Richardson. I'd like to be part of the solution. Maya nodded, a small smile forming. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. The executive lounge at Chicago O'Hare Airport buzzed with hushed conversations and the gentle clinking of coffee cups against saucers. Maya sat at the far end of the conference table watching as the room slowly filled. She'd made a few calls, and now key Horizon Airline staff were gathering for an impromptu meeting. The regional manager for Chicago, the head of customer experience, the director of staff training, and the 2 employees from the gate incident. The gate attendant, whose name badge read Diane, kept nervously adjusting her collar. The supervisor, Patricia, sat with perfect posture, but her fingers drummed an anxious rhythm on her leather portfolio. They both looked like they were waiting for the axe to fall, despite Maya's assurances. Once everyone had arrived, Maya stood. The room fell silent immediately. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, she began. I want to talk about what happened today at JFK, but more importantly, I want to talk about why it matters. She recounted the incident briefly, not dwelling on details but making sure everyone understood the core issue. The regional manager winced visibly. The training director took rapid notes. I'm not here to point fingers, Maya continued. What happened to me today has happened to many of our passengers. The difference is I own the airline, so I can do something about it. Maya clicked a remote, and the large screen behind her lit up with customer feedback data, graphs, percentages, and most tellingly, direct quotes from passenger complaints. The flight attendant seemed surprised when I presented my first-class ticket, Maya read aloud. The gate agent asked 3 times if I was in the right line for priority boarding. My seat was double-checked while the white passenger next to me was welcomed aboard with a smile. She set down the remote and looked around the table. These aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a pattern that's costing us customers and, more importantly, hurting people who've paid for our services just like anyone else. Patricia raised her hand tentatively. Ms. Richardson, if I may, I've been with Horizon for 12 years, and we've always prided ourselves on customer service. Our training specifically addresses treating all passengers with respect. Maya nodded. I believe that. But there's a difference between what we intend and what actually happens. Today, you both assumed I didn't belong in first class. Not because of anything in the computer system, but because of how I looked. Diane swallowed hard but didn't deny it. You're right, she said quietly. When I saw you in line, I just assumed. I didn't even realize I was doing it until you showed your ID. A heavy silence fell over the room. The head of customer experience, a middle-aged man with Essie, alt and pepper hair, cleared his throat. What do you propose, Ms. Richardson? Maya walked slowly around the table. I want us to transform how we approach this issue, not just more training videos that people click through, something real, something that changes how we operate from the ground up. She stopped behind Diane and Patricia's chairs. And I want these two employees to help lead the initiative. Both women turned in their seats, shock evident on their faces. Us? Patricia asked. But we're the ones who made the mistake. Exactly, Maya said. You've seen the problem firsthand. You've felt it. That makes you perfect advocates for change. The director of staff training looked skeptical. With all due respect, Ms. Richardson, we already have diversity consultants who create presentations that look nice but don't change behaviors, Maya finished for him. I know, I've seen them. What I'm talking about is different. She returned to her seat and leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. I want real stories, real consequences. I want every employee to understand not just that this happens, but how it feels when it happens to you. Maya turned to Diane. How did you feel when you realized who I was? Diane's cheeks flushed. Horrified, embarrassed. I couldn't believe what I'd done. And if I hadn't been the owner, if I'd just been another passenger who got treated that way, Diane looked down at her hands. I probably wouldn't have thought twice about it, she admitted. I would have believed I was just doing my job. That's the gap we need to close, Maya said. The difference between what we think is happening and what's actually happening. The regional manager shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What exactly are you proposing? Maya smiled for the first time since the meeting began. I'm glad you asked. I'm proposing a complete overhaul of how we approach this issue. I've been working on some ideas since I acquired Horizon, but today made it clear we need to accelerate the timeline. She tapped her tablet, and new slides appeared on the screen. Organizational charts, process flows, training modules. First, I want mystery shoppers who reflect the diversity of our passengers. People who will travel on our flights and report back on their experiences. Second, I want a new feedback system that specifically tracks these issues and highlights patterns. The head of customer experience was writing rapidly now, nodding as Maya spoke. Third, I want a complete revamp of our training program, led by a team that includes Patricia and Diane. Not as punishment, but because they've seen both sides of the problem now. Patricia's posture softened slightly. You really want us involved? After what happened? Especially after what happened, Maya replied. Your perspective is valuable precisely because you've made this mistake and recognized it. That's the first step toward real change. The training director still looked dubious. This will be expensive and time-consuming. Yes, it will, Maya agreed without hesitation. And it will be worth every penny and every minute, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's good business. Passengers who feel respected become loyal customers. Staff who understand these issues provide better service to everyone. She stood again, signaling that the meeting was nearing its conclusion. I'm not asking if we should do this. I'm telling you we are doing this. The only question is how quickly and how well we can implement these changes. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the regional manager spoke up. I'm in. Whatever resources you need from my team, they're yours. Others around the table began to nod. The energy in the room had shifted from defensive to determined. Thank you, Maya said. We'll have a formal kickoff next week. For now, I want you all to start thinking about how we can make this work in your areas. As the meeting broke up, Maya noticed Diane lingering behind. When the others had filed out, the gate attendant approached hesitantly. Ms. Richardson, can I ask you something? Of course. Diane twisted her hands together. Why aren't you firing me? What I did? It was terrible. I'd understand if you wanted me gone. Maya studied the woman for a moment. Do you think what happened today is something only you would do? Something unique to you as a person? Diane considered this. No, she finally said. I think a lot of people would have done the same thing. Maybe most people. Exactly, Maya said. Firing you doesn't solve that problem. It just makes everyone else hide their biases better, not actually address them. She gestured for Diane to sit, and they both took seats at the now empty conference table. Let me ask you something, Maya continued. Before today, did you think of yourself as someone who would discriminate against passengers? No. Diane looked genuinely distressed. Never. I've always prided myself on treating everyone equally. And yet, when I showed up with a first-class ticket dressed casually, you immediately assumed something was wrong. Diane nodded slowly. I did. And I didn't even realize I was doing it until you revealed who you were. She paused, then added, That's the scary part, isn't it? I didn't know I was doing it. That's exactly the point, Maya said gently. Most people don't wake up in the morning planning to discriminate. They don't see themselves as biased. It happens in small moments, quick judgments, tiny decisions that add up to big impacts. Diane's eyes were damp now. How do we fix something we don't even see ourselves doing? By talking about it, by admitting it happens, by creating systems that help us catch ourselves in these moments. Maya leaned forward. That's why I need you on this team, Diane. Because you've seen both sides now. You know it can happen even when we don't intend it to. Outside the conference room windows, planes taxied across the tarmac, each carrying hundreds of passengers with their own stories, their own experiences. Maya watched them for a moment, thinking about all the invisible interactions happening. Aboard each aircraft, we won't fix this overnight, she said, turning back to Diane. But we can start today, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Diane straightened in her chair, a new resolve visible in her expression. I want to help. I really do. I never want another passenger to feel the way you must have felt today. Maya smiled, a genuine smile this time. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Now let's get to work. As they gathered their things to leave, Maya thought about her flight home that evening. She would be traveling as the owner this time, her identity known to the crew. But she was already planning her next anonymous trip, already wondering what other corners of her company might need the same kind of attention. Change wouldn't happen all at once, but it would happen, one conversation, one revelation, one converted employee at a time. 3 weeks after the incident at JFK, Maya sat in her office overlooking the Chicago skyline. The wall of windows offered a spectacular view of Lake Michigan, its surface shimmering in the morning sunlight. On her desk sat a thick binder labeled Project Sky Equal, the name they'd chosen for Horizon's new initiative. She flipped through the pages, scanning the early progress reports. Patricia and Diane had thrown themselves into the project with unexpected enthusiasm. Maybe it was relief at keeping their jobs, or maybe it was genuine conviction. Either way, they were proving to be valuable team members. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, Maya called. Her chief operating officer, Robert, entered with a tablet in hand. Morning. Got the first batch of mystery shopper reports. Maya gestured to the chair across from her desk. And? Robert sat down with a sigh. It's worse than we thought. Across our major routes, passengers of color with first-class tickets reported surprised reactions from staff at a rate 3 times higher than white passengers. Women traveling alone in business class were questioned about their seat assignments twice as often as men. Not surprising, Maya said, but still disappointing to see the numbers. There's more, Robert continued. We had our mystery shoppers dressed differently on different trips, business attire versus casual clothes. The difference in treatment was dramatic, especially for passengers of color. Maya nodded, remembering her torn boarding pass. Any bright spots? A few. Robert scrolled through his tablet. Some of our crews scored perfectly, and interestingly, the routes with the most diverse staff had fewer issues overall. Maya made a note on her pad. We need to look into that correlation more closely. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. The training team is waiting in conference room B, she told Robert. Let's go see what they've come up with. They walked through the executive floor, past glass-walled offices and busy assistants. Employees straightened as Maya passed, some offering nervous smiles. Word of the JFK incident had spread through the company, along with rumors about major changes coming down the pipeline. In the conference room, 8 people sat around a large table. Patricia and Diane were there, along with the training director and several instructional designers. A screen on the wall displayed a presentation title, Sky Equal, Beyond Awareness. Maya took a seat at the head of the table. Show me what you've got. The training director began the presentation, clicking through slides about traditional diversity training and its limitations. Maya listened with half an ear, more interested in watching Patricia and Diane. Their body language had changed since that first meeting, less defensive, more engaged, which is why we're proposing something completely different, the training director was saying. Not just videos and quizzes, but immersive experiences. That caught Maya's attention. Immersive how? Patricia leaned forward. May I? She asked the training director, who nodded and handed over the presenter remote. We're calling it Walk the Journey, Patricia said, advancing to a new slide. Instead of telling staff about unconscious bias, we want them to experience it firsthand. How exactly would that work? Robert asked. Diane spoke up. Role reversal scenarios. Staff members would experience what it feels like to be unfairly judged, to have their qualifications questioned, to be treated with subtle disrespect. These experiences would be facilitated by trained instructors, Patricia added. Follow-up discussions would help participants process what they felt and connect it to passenger experiences. Maya studied the concept outline on screen. What makes you think this will be more effective than standard training? Patricia and Diane exchanged glances. Because it worked on us, Diane said simply. What changed our perspective wasn't a policy memo or a training video. It was experiencing that moment when you showed us your ID, when we realized what we'd done and how it must have felt for you. We can't create exactly that moment for everyone, Patricia continued, but we can design experiences that evoke similar realizations. Maya nodded slowly. I like the direction, but I'm concerned about scalability. We have thousands of employees across dozens of locations. That's where this comes in, the training director said, advancing to the next slide. It showed a detailed implementation plan with phases and timelines. We start with key customer-facing roles and locations with higher complaint rates. Leadership goes through it first, then we roll out to the broader organization. They spent the next hour debating details, adjusting timelines, and challenging assumptions. By the time they finished, the implementation plan had been refined into something workable, if ambitious. All right, Maya said finally. Green light, but I want weekly progress reports, and I want to participate in the first session myself. As the team gathered their materials, Maya pulled Patricia and Diane aside. I have another assignment for you two. They looked at her expectantly. I want you to join me for dinner tonight. There's someone I'd like you to meet. That evening, at a quiet restaurant near company headquarters, Maya sat at a corner table waiting for her guests. The restaurant was upscale but not flashy, with warm lighting and comfortable seating. Patricia arrived first, dressed in a simple black dress that looked quite different from her Horizon uniform. Diane came a few minutes later, apologizing for the traffic. Our other guest should be here shortly, Maya said after they'd ordered drinks. As if on cue, a woman approached their table. She was in her 60s, with silver streaks in her dark hair and an elegant burgundy suit. Maya stood to greet her with a warm hug. "Patricia, Diane, this is Dr. Josephine Wilson. She's a longtime friend and mentor of mine, and she happens to be one of the leading experts on organizational transformation." Dr. Wilson smiled as she took a seat. "Maya's being kind. I'm just a professor who spent too many years watching companies try and fail to address these issues. Dr. Wilson has agreed to serve as an advisor on Project Sky Equal," Maya explained. "I wanted you to meet her informally before she starts working with the team." They ordered dinner, and as they waited for their food, Dr. Wilson asked Patricia and Diane about their experiences at Horizon. "How long have you both been with the airline?" 12 years for me," Patricia replied. "Started as a flight attendant, worked my way up to supervisor." 8 years, Diane said. "Always at the gate." Dr. Wilson nodded. "And in all those years, did you ever receive training on unconscious bias or cultural awareness?" They both nodded. "Multiple times," Patricia said. "It's required annually." "And yet," Dr. Wilson said gently, "when Maya showed up with a first-class ticket, something in your mind said, 'This doesn't compute.'" Diane looked down at her plate. "Yes. I'm not saying this to make you feel bad," Dr. Wilson continued. "I'm pointing out that traditional training clearly isn't enough. Knowledge doesn't automatically change behavior, especially when the behavior is unconscious." Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. As they began to eat, Dr. Wilson continued, "What makes your walk the journey concept promising is that it targets feelings, not just thoughts. People don't change deeply held patterns based on information alone. They change when they feel something powerful enough to shake their assumptions." Maya watched her 2 employees absorb this. They were nodding, engaged in a way they hadn't been during formal meetings. "The challenge," Dr. Wilson continued, "is creating experiences powerful enough to evoke those feelings, but safe enough that people don't shut down defensively. It's a delicate balance." They spent the rest of dinner discussing the nuances of the training approach, with Dr. Wilson sharing stories from other organizations that had tried similar methods. Some had succeeded brilliantly. Others had created more problems than they solved. The key difference, she explained, was leadership involvement. When executives participated fully and vulnerably, staff followed their example. When executives treated it as something for other people to learn, it failed. Maya nodded. "That's why I'll be in the first session. And I expect my entire executive team to do the same." As they finished their desserts, Dr. Wilson turned to Patricia and Diane with a more personal question. "May I ask how this experience has affected you both, beyond your professional roles?" Patricia considered the question. "It's made me question a lot of things, not just at work but in my daily life. Who I automatically trust, who I'm suspicious of, judgments I make without realizing it." Diane nodded in agreement. "I keep catching myself making assumptions about people based on how they look or dress. It's uncomfortable to notice, but necessary, I guess." "That discomfort is growth," Dr. Wilson said. "Most people avoid it. The fact that you're leaning into it speaks well of both of you." As the evening wound down, Maya paid the bill, despite Dr. Wilson's protests. They stood outside the restaurant, saying their goodbyes, the cool night air a pleasant contrast to the warm interior. "I'll see you both tomorrow at the office," Maya said to Patricia and Diane. 9 a.m. in the main conference room. "We're reviewing the first draft of the new customer feedback system." They nodded and headed toward the parking garage, their conversation continuing as they walked away. Dr. Wilson watched them go, then turned to Maya with a small smile. "You know, when you told me about what happened at JFK, I expected you'd want advice on firing them diplomatically." Maya shook her head. "Firing them would have been easy. Changing the system is hard. But that's the only way to create lasting impact." "That's why you're good at this," Dr. Wilson said. "You understand the difference between treating symptoms and curing the disease." They walked slowly toward their cars, discussing next steps and potential pitfalls. The project was still in its early stages, with many challenges ahead. But for the first time since the incident, Maya felt genuinely optimistic about where they were heading. "We won't fix everything," she acknowledged, but we'll make it better. And that's a start. 6 months after the boarding pass incident, Maya stood at the back of a packed auditorium at Horizon's headquarters. On stage, Patricia was presenting the results of Project Sky Equal to an audience of industry representatives, journalists, and Horizon staff. In the first quarter since full implementation, Patricia said, indicating a graph on the screen behind her, customer complaints related to unfair treatment decreased by 62%. Employee satisfaction scores increased by 28%. And our mystery shopper reports show consistent improvement across all routes and service levels. Maya felt a quiet pride as she watched Patricia navigate the Q&A session with confidence. The nervous gate supervisor from 6 months ago had transformed into a poised diversity advocate who now regularly spoke at industry events. A journalist from the Business Travel Weekly raised her hand. These results are impressive, but how do you know they'll last? Many diversity initiatives show early improvements that fade over time. Patricia nodded, acknowledging the valid concern. That's why we've built sustainability into the program design. This isn't a one-time training that staff can check off and forget. It's a continuous process with regular check-ins, refresher experiences, and ongoing measurement. She gestured to Diane, who was seated in the front row. My colleague can speak to the accountability measures we've implemented. Diane joined Patricia on stage. She'd recently been promoted to lead the customer experience team, a role created specifically for Project Sky Equal. We've established what we call culture pods at every major hub, Diane explained. These are small groups of employees who meet regularly to discuss real situations they've encountered, share feedback they've received, and hold each other accountable for living up to our new standards. Maya slipped out of the auditorium as the presentation continued. She had a flight to catch, another incognito trip, this time through Horizon's Atlanta hub. These undercover journeys had become a regular part of her routine, a way to experience the airline as ordinary passengers did. In the executive lounge, Maya's assistant waited with a small suitcase and a folder of documents. Your boarding pass and ID for today's trip, he said, handing her an envelope. You'll be traveling as Lisa Johnso, a middle school teacher from Detroit. Maya smiled as she took the envelope. Do I look like a middle school teacher? Her assistant tilted his head, considering her casual outfit of jeans, sneakers, and a Detroit Tigers baseball cap. Absolutely. The reading glasses are a nice touch. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Maya replied, tucking the envelope into her bag. Remember, no special treatment. I want the standard passenger experience, good or bad. Understood. The car will take you to the general terminal, not the executive entrance. He hesitated, then added, the quarterly numbers came in this morning. Passenger retention is up 12% compared to last year. That's even better than we projected, Maya said, genuinely pleased. The financial impact of Project Sky Equal had been a point of contention with some board members who questioned the return on investment. These numbers would help make the case for continued funding. One more thing, her assistant said, handing her a newspaper. You made the cover of Business Leadership today. The magazine cover showed Maya sitting on the edge of her desk, looking directly at the camera. The headline read, The Richardson Revolution, How One CEO's Bad Flight Changed an Industry. The writer wants to know if you have any comment on being nominated for the Diversity Innovation Award, her assistant added. Maya handed the magazine back. Tell him I'm honored, but that the real credit goes to the team implementing the changes, especially Patricia and Diane. She glanced at her watch. I need to get going if I'm going to clear security in time. Her assistant nodded. Good luck, Ms. Richardson, or should I say, Ms. Johnson? Lisa is fine, Maya replied with a small smile, adjusting her baseball cap, lower over her eyes. 2 hours later, Maya sat in the general boarding area of Atlanta's busy terminal. She'd made it through security without incident. A middle-aged black woman in casual clothes attracted little attention among the thousands of travelers passing through. She observed the gate agents as they prepared for boarding, noting the new procedures that had been implemented. Instead of making snap judgments about which passengers belonged in which class, agents now followed a structured process for every traveler. Boarding will begin shortly for Flight 372 to Detroit, announced a gate agent. We'll start with passengers, who need extra assistance, followed by our premium cabin and loyalty members. Maya watched as an elderly couple approached the gate, followed by a mother with a small child. The agents helped them scan their boarding passes with patient smiles. When premium boarding was called, Maya joined the line with her first-class ticket. The agent greeted her with the same professional courtesy she'd shown the previous passengers. "Good afternoon, Ms. Johnson. Detroit today?" she said, scanning the boarding pass. "Yes, heading home after a conference," Maya replied, staying in character. "Wonderful. You're in seat 3A. Have a pleasant flight. No suspicion, no double-checking, no torn boarding pass. Just a normal, respectful interaction, exactly what every passenger deserved." On board, the flight attendant welcomed her to the first-class cabin without a hint of surprise or skepticism. As Maya settled into her seat, she reflected on how such a simple thing, being treated like she belonged, had once been an exception rather than the rule. The flight to Detroit was smooth and uneventful. Maya used the time to review notes from her meetings and jot down observations about her travel experience. When they landed, she lingered in her seat, letting other passengers disembark first so she could observe the crew interactions. As she finally made her way to the exit, the flight attendant who had served the first-class cabin gave her a warm smile. "Enjoy your stay in Detroit, Ms. Johnson." "Thank you," Maya replied. "By the way, I noticed the service today was excellent, very professional and consistent." The flight attendant beamed. "Thank you for saying so. We've been through some new training recently that's really changed how we approach our work." "Oh?" Maya feigned ignorance. "What kind of training?" "It's called Sky Equal. It's all about making sure every passenger gets the same great experience no matter who they are." The flight attendant lowered her voice slightly. "Between us, it's the best program the company has ever rolled out. Really makes you think about things differently." Maya nodded, feeling a flutter of satisfaction. "Sounds impressive. I'm glad it's making a difference." She exited the plane and made her way through the terminal to the private car that would take her to the hotel. Once inside the vehicle, she removed her baseball cap and glasses, letting out a long breath. Her phone buzzed with a message from Robert. "How was the flight?" "Exactly as it should be," she typed back. "Ordinary, unremarkable, perfect." The next morning, Maya entered the conference room at Horizon's Detroit office, where the local leadership team waited nervously for this surprise visit from the CEO. They rose as she entered, murmuring greetings. "Good morning," Maya said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "I flew in on yesterday's Atlanta flight as Lisa Johnson. I'd like to discuss what I observed." The regional director swallowed visibly. "We hope your experience was satisfactory, Ms. Richardson." "It was more than satisfactory," Maya replied. "It was exactly what we've been working toward. Natural, professional service without a hint of the biases we've been fighting." Relief washed over the faces around the table. "But," Maya continued, "one good flight doesn't mean our work is done. I want to hear from you about the challenges you're still facing with implementation." For the next hour, she listened as the team shared honest feedback about the project. What was working, what wasn't, where they needed more support. Maya took notes, asked questions, and offered suggestions. "The culture pods are struggling to find meeting times that work for flight crews with irregular schedules," one manager explained, "and some staff still see the immersive training as too confrontational," added another. Maya nodded. "These are valid concerns. Let's problem solve together." By the end of the meeting, they had developed actionable solutions for each issue raised. The team seemed energized, engaged in a way they hadn't been at the start. As the meeting wrapped up, Maya's assistant slipped her a note. Patricia called. "The presentation went exceptionally well. Industry Association wants Horizon to lead a panel on inclusive customer service at next month's conference." Maya smiled. What had begun as a personal humiliation had evolved into something much bigger than she'd initially imagined. Not just a company initiative, but an industry movement. That evening, as her private jet prepared for takeoff back to Chicago, Maya gazed out the window at the Detroit skyline. She thought about the flight attendant's words. It really makes you think about things differently. That was the true measure of success. Not awards or magazine covers or even improved statistics, but the shift in perspective that was happening person by person throughout the company. Her phone chimed with an incoming email. It was from Diane, with the subject line, "You won't believe this." The message contained only a photo, a picture of a torn boarding pass that had been framed and mounted on the wall of the training center. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Where change began." Maya smiled and typed a quick reply. "Perfect. Remind me to tell you about my flight as Lisa Johnson." As the plane accelerated down the runway, Maya leaned back in her seat, feeling a deep satisfaction. The work wasn't finished, might never be truly finished, but real change was happening. One flight, one interaction, one shifted perspective at a time. The torn boarding pass that had once represented disrespect and assumption had become a symbol of transformation. A reminder that sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin with a painful moment of truth. And as her plane lifted into the evening sky, Maya Richardson knew that this particular journey was just getting started.